Peter B. Collins News and Comments. It's Friday, December 8th, 2017. And once again, if you're listening to the audio podcast, you're missing the visuals because as I record the podcast, we are live on Facebook video. And we are debuting our brand new customized logo backdrop. Yeah, we took the quilt down, and I want to thank Kathy Garrison. She's a family friend. She's a fan of the podcast. She lives in suburban Portland in Aloha, Oregon. And despite knee surgery and other complications over the last few months, she has put together this beautiful backdrop that you see behind me with our logo beautifully displayed. And Richard Mott, no, you didn't get your mention yet. You didn't put up the the logo background. So, Kathy, I hope you're watching today, and I do want to thank you for all the effort you put into this. It's a real upgrade. I did have it pressed at a dry cleaner's, but it's still got some wrinkles. We'll bring in an iron and get those corrected in time for next week's podcast. But I've got news to talk about, and I want to hear your comments today. Topic A on the Peter B. Collins podcast is, should Al Franken have resigned yesterday? And I want to open up the phone lines. You can call in at any time. There are very few rules here at the PBC podcast. And one rule we don't have is any kind of language restrictions. So if you want to say those bastards forced Al Franken out, we'll let you do that. All you got to do is pick up the phone and give us a call at 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. And I would love to hear your comments on this, particularly if you believe that Al Franken did the right thing by resigning. I'm hearing from a lot of progressives and Democrats who believe that he should have hung in there and waited for the Ethics Committee to weigh in on an investigation. So I'd love to hear your comments on that. 415-455-0795 is my number, and I would love to hear from you today. You can call in at any time, and also if you want to talk about other issues, that is fine as well. So 415-455-0102 is my number. I want to begin today with some troubling cop killings. One that occurred about a year ago, January of 2016, in the suburb Mesa near Phoenix, Arizona. And an officer named Philip Brailsford shot and killed a 26-year-old man, Daniel Shaver, in a hotel. It was in the hallway outside Shaver's room. And the officer had responded to a complaint from other patrons of the hotel that someone was brandishing a gun out of the window, presumably the room of Mr. Shaver. But there is a powerful video, and it's really disturbing to watch it. In the show file for today's podcast, I am linking to the Vice News story that includes the body cam video from the police officer that was finally released after a jury exonerated him of any wrongdoing. And I find this outrageous. Now, I sat on a jury earlier this year. I do respect the decisions that juries have to make. It's not easy. And I also recognize that a lot of the testimony that juries see today comes from video. And so I just cannot believe that when you watch this video, you will see this man following the orders of the police officer. He's commanded to get down and crawl on the floor. He did it. Then he's told to kneel and to raise his arms. And the cop keeps threatening to shoot him as he begs, "Please don't shoot me." Then, as the sequence continues, the cop says, "Your arms are not up in the air straight enough." And so the guy does I'll do this on camera, but my hands are going to be out of the picture. But he does a complete hands raised, almost like the yoga tree position. And then the cop tells him to crawl toward him. And at that point, he fires and shoots multiple bullets from a semi-automatic AR-15 and a jury deliberated for less than 6 hours to find that the cop was not guilty. Now, I again don't wish to second-guess the work of a jury. I don't know what went on in the courtroom that led them to declare that this cop was justified in shooting and killing this man. But we know that the guy was unarmed. He had a couple of pellet guns in his room. Perhaps that's what he pointed out the window. He was a pest control professional, and those pellet guns were part of his toolkit. But he was not accused of brandishing or even possessing one of those little fake guns, pellet gun, while he had the interaction with the cop. And here in San Francisco, we have a recent event where a rookie cop, he'd only been on duty for 4 days, came into a situation where a man had conducted a carjacking. He took a van away from a woman, and he drove the van. The police gave chase. And at a certain point, he got out of the van, and for unknown reasons, the suspect, Keita Iggy O'Neill, a 42-year-old dreadlocked African-American man, he, for some reason, got out of his stolen van and started running toward the pursuing patrol car. Now, if he had directed the van toward the patrol car and, was attempting to use it as a weapon, I could understand that. But he was unarmed, and, yes, he was a suspect in a pursuit. But I can see no reason why the officer fired, much less why he shot him in a way that killed him. Whatever happened to shoot to wound? Shoot to disable somebody. And San Francisco cops have just gotten approval to be issued tasers that are described as less lethal. And I bet this incident will be used to justify the deployment of tasers. But I just brought you a report a couple of days ago about a study about taser use in jails that shows that over 100 inmates have been killed in incidents involving the less lethal tasers. And I think all but 2 of those cases were unarmed prisoners. It's hard to justify. Meanwhile, the violence is building in Israel and Palestine in reaction to Trump's idiotic decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. And even Tom Friedman said that Trump is a chump because he didn't get anything in exchange for that giveaway of a major prize from the point of view of Israel. So following Muslim prayers today, there were many protests from Istanbul to Palestine, Gaza, Jerusalem, and one Palestinian was shot dead by an Israeli army member. This was in Gaza. And the protests, I hope, will remain nonviolent for the most part, but that's hard to expect from a population that has been denied its rights for such a long period of time. And they see slipping away the prospects for any kind of a meaningful peace deal. And we see the Trump team with Crown Prince Jared colluding with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia to essentially cram down on the Palestinians what Trump wants to describe as a great deal. But in fact, it will give them almost nothing. So Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, is preparing for 24 hours of urgent consultations with other Palestinian factions, including Hamas. And it is expected that he will announce that he's cutting ties with U.S. peace negotiators, as well as canceling a meeting with Vice President Pence, who is planning to visit Bethlehem later this month. Now, that invitation cancellation is really minor in comparison. But one of the interesting angles here is that my first reaction was, well, Trump is delivering, he's pandering to the AIPAC lobby in the United States, to Netanyahu, and to the extreme right Zionist government in Israel. But it's important to note that he's also pandering to American audiences, including evangelical Christians, who regard the conflict in the Middle East as the route to the end times. And they want to bring it on. And this is just such a bizarre interpretation of religion, of Christianity, to imagine that stoking a conflict because you believe that it will lead to Judgment Day and your rise to heaven everlasting. I just find that so bizarre. But it is true that the evangelicals here in the United States are championing and congratulating Trump for this very dangerous move. So we'll see how this plays out. It's interesting to note that Rachel Maddow, who many of my listeners and Facebook viewers watch on a regular basis on MSNBC, the only aspect that she has covered of Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is that as Trump delivered his teleprompter speech toward the end, he appeared to get dry mouth or some other problem. He was slurring his words a little bit, and he particularly struggled at the end when he was trying to say, "God bless the United States." Rachel Maddow seized on that gaffe, that little moment, and, maybe Trump has other problems. I'm not trying to excuse him. But she chose to cover his slurred speech at the end instead of the content of the speech that he had just given. And this part of a long pattern. Rachel Maddow does not cover the Israel-Palestine conflict. She avoids it just as much as possible. And she's laser-focused, of course, on protecting us from the scourge of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Oh, we'll get to that in a little bit. My lines are open and nobody's calling right now, so you can get through very quickly here. I'd like to hear your comment on whether Al Franken should have resigned, whether you think that his wrongdoing amounted to a dismissible offense, or if you think politically he made the wrong decision because he took the high road, but Roy Moore is certainly planning to take the low road into Washington, D.C., if he is named the winner of Tuesday's special election in Alabama to replace Jeff Sessions in the United States Senate. So give me a call. Let me know about that. 415-455-0102. More news related to Israel, this coming from Arizona, where a man named Michael Jordahl owns a law firm, and he has a contract with a county jail district in Arizona. He recently was written an extension of his contract, and it came with an additional page that he was required to sign, certifying under state law that as a contractor, he is not engaged in the boycott of Israel. Now, you probably know about boycott, divestment, and sanctions. A lot of religious leaders, the Presbyterian Church and others in this country, have engaged in this effort to send a message to Israel by refusing to buy products or patronize companies until things change in relation to the apartheid treatment of the Palestinian people. And I strongly support this effort. I think we are well within our First Amendment rights to decide how we spend our money and to direct it in ways that match our opinions, our views, and our values. But Arizona is one of, 16 other states that has passed one of these laws at the behest of the Israel lobby that sanction people for attempting to sanction Israel. And this is way out of bounds. It is a very selective conflict with the First Amendment, singles out the state of Israel for preferential treatment in terms of our speech, and this man, who is a lawyer, has now taken on representation by the ACLU to sue Arizona to overturn that law. We've got one on the books here in California. It doesn't have a lot of teeth, but it is odious nonetheless. And if there is one in your state, I hope you will resist it in every way possible. Now, there was a conference held by Jewish Voices for Peace. I believe it was in New York, and it was recently, maybe last weekend. And they took on the issue of trying to define opposition to Israel separate from the term anti-Semitism, because many supporters of Israel lump together those who are critics of the government and its policies with people who just plainly hate Jews. And this article at The Intercept is interesting because it begins by focusing on Sebastian Gorka. You remember him? He was hustled out of the White House in August. He had been part of the initial Trump team, and he has a history of supporting a fringe nationalist party in Hungary. I believe that's the land of his ancestors, that is known for being against Jews and described as the roots of Jewish terrorism. That's on the party's own website. So get this. Sebastian Gorka responded to critics of Trump's move about Jerusalem, saying that the left's anti-Semitism, veiled as anti-Israeli policies, is the real threat to peace. Now let's work with this for a moment, Mr. Gorka, because let's assume your charge is right, that it's the left that is truly anti-Semitic, and that is the threat to peace? No, it is Israel's illegal occupation, its illegal expansion of illegal settlements on Palestinian land. These are the provocations that are the threat to peace, not law-abiding Americans who choose to boycott Israel until Israel gets the message. So at this conference of Jewish Voice for Peace, one of the people who spoke up is the executive director of JVP, Rebecca Vilkomerson. She said, this is a complicated issue. Anti-Semitism in the United States is frighteningly and ever more visibly real. And you need not look beyond the protest in Charlottesville to find examples. She said it's profoundly dangerous, unethical, and inaccurate to characterize people in groups like JVP that support full civil and human rights of Palestinians as not only anti-Semitic, but equivalent to Nazis. It minimizes the true fight against anti-Semitism we all desperately need to be waging. Amen, sister. Lines are open. I'd like to hear your call, hear your comments on Al Franken or any other subject. 415-455-0102 is my number. Well, the latest news of the Trump-Russia investigation is that Don Trump Jr. spent, I believe, almost 8 hours before the House Intelligence Committee the other day, and they dropped a little gotcha on him. They said, hey, you ever see this email before? The email purportedly came from WikiLeaks, and it included an encryption key to unlock hacked material that WikiLeaks had grabbed from the Clinton campaign or from the DNC. And let me rephrase that. I shouldn't have said that WikiLeaks grabbed it. They received it. And, of course, our intelligence community says they received it from Russian actors, Russian agents, and I've seen no proof of that. At any rate, this encryption key was to access hacked documents, and it's unknown whether these are documents that were available on the WikiLeaks website to anybody who went there, or if these were specially selected for the consumption of Don Jr. and his pappy. We're told the email came from somebody named Mike Erickson. Don Jr. said he doesn't remember the email, he doesn't know who Erickson is, and he took no action to pursue whatever that encryption key might have unlocked. And I do agree that Julian Assange compromised himself by attempting to communicate directly with the Trump campaign. But he did it in part to try to seduce Don Jr. into giving WikiLeaks Donald Trump's tax returns. And he also, in an outlandish way, suggested that Trump appoint Julian Assange to be the the Australian ambassador to the United States. Now, first, Australia would have to make the effort or the offer to appoint him, and I don't know that that is in the offing in any way, shape, or form. But this is the latest lame leak that CNN got from the House Intelligence Committee, and I just find it fascinating to see how they are continuing to promote this story when there is no public evidence to support it. And what would Julian Assange say if he were here?
This is a historic act of devastating incompetence.
Yeah, incompetence. At any rate, today I am releasing a new in-depth interview with journalist Yasha Levine. Yasha is a guy who went to computer school, UC Berkeley. He's a journalist of 15 years' experience. He's got a new book out called Surveillance Valley that'll debut in February, and he'll be back on the show for that. But I caught up with him to talk about this whole Russiagate scandal, and he noted that Senator Feinstein from here in California threatened the big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, Google, with regulation unless they regulate themselves. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Yasha Levine.
Feinstein from California, she had your senator. She kind of had this almost kind of ominous warning to these companies. Said, like, you know, these are your platforms. You built them, and you're responsible for them. And if you don't do something to keep the Russians out, right, or to keep sort of Russian influence out, because it's very hard to know what the Russians are, to keep this malign influence out, we will do something about it. And so there is this sort of, I feel like a kind of what's going to happen is Silicon Valley is going to essentially be allowed to self-regulate itself, and to regulate out voices that are seen as sort of foreign or malicious, right? And it's going to be able to make that determination itself. These companies are going to be able to do that, and they're going to be the first frontline guardians of the information that's deemed useful, right, and good for democracy, and information that is seen as malicious and bad for democracy. And what I think is kind of happening in a way is they're kind of, it's bringing the national security state and Silicon Valley even closer and tying them even more closely to the Democratic and Republican Party.
That's the voice of Yasha Levine, an excerpt from our in-depth interview. It'll be released later today for subscribers at peterbcollins.com and most of our outlets, including iTunes. I've got a caller on the line, on line one. Welcome to the Peter B. Collins podcast. Who's this?
It's Susan, Peter.
Hi, Susan. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's the first time I caught you for a while.
Yeah, what's on your mind today?
Al Franken.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to really like the guy.
Okay.
And I think it's a giant mistake what they've done. He was, he offered to be investigated the very first moment that this all happened. And I think he deserved that. He deserved his day to be listened to. He also deserves to know who his accusers are. These last ones, apparently, I didn't even follow it because there was nothing there. They just said it was anonymous.
Right. There are a total of 8 accusers, and 4 of them are anonymous.
Okay. And what are these people saying? He didn't rape anybody, right?
Nope. It was butt grabbing and an accusation that he grabbed a woman's breast while they took a photo together. No, there was no nudity involved in any activities, and that there were accusations of inappropriate advances. And Susan, let's work through this a bit, because one of my big beefs here is that in this Me Too movement, where people are being accused, and within hours in some cases, They lose their job.
Right.
There's no evidence that is put forward. They kind of sheepishly just resign, apologize, and go dark. And we need to make a distinction between bad behavior and sexual crimes. And if we want to use Harvey Weinstein as the worst example, it does appear that he is a serial sexual predator who used his position to obtain access to vulnerable women whom he could leverage for his sexual pleasure. And those are serious sex crimes. But what Al Franken is accused of, and the manner in which this all rolled out, it's clear to me that this was an orchestrated effort to respond to the attacks on Roy Moore. And it's also payback from Jeff Sessions, because Al Franken grilled Jeff Sessions and proved that Sessions has repeatedly lied under oath about his contacts with Russians. And so, the politics of this are very clear to most observers. And so I found it pretty odious that, within a 24-hour period after the last accuser surfaced, that 32 members of the United States Senate Democratic caucus all demanded that he resign. Because, we don't have a process here. There's no fairness. You pointed out he doesn't get to confront his accusers or even know who they are. And this is a hell of a way to operate.
Right, and I'm really disappointed. I like Senator Gillibrand a lot. Oops. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead. Susan?
Hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. You're talking about Senator Gillibrand.
For some reason, my car, which is about 200 feet away, is taking my calls into the hum, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I really like her. She's one of my favorites. But I really disliked what she did and the way that she did it. And I think it's that they want to prove themselves. They want to show themselves to be strong and unlike the Republicans, but they're not thinking.
Yes.
And I think can come back on them. Plus, they're losing one of the best people they have. I think we also have to make a distinction between behavior that happens while they're in public, service, and something like he was doing when he was the clown that he is,
Right.
And that is, it's just unbelievable to me. This has been this has been one that's knocked me over a little bit because it's so unfair. And he is the best. And I'm glad that he's decided to stick around for a while his votes are really needed.
Yeah.
Well, his voice is needed.
And Susan, let me be frank with you that I've met Al Franken a couple of times. I didn't find him to be warm or charming, but that's not really material. I also was disappointed because during the Air America phase, he was their marquee guy. He sucked a lot of money out of the company, and he wasn't very good at talk radio.
Yeah, but I don't think any of that matters. He's a good senator.
Right. I'm only telling you that to underscore that I'm not defending Al Franken because I like him or, because I think that he is indispensable in the United States Senate. I am defending him as a man who is being accused and who has not been able to respond properly and in a fair manner to these accusations. And as this whole Me Too movement continues, there's a lot of benefit to it. Okay, I don't deny that exposing these gruesome men who have used their power over women in very atrocious ways, I understand that. But we have to have some sort of relative scale of wrongdoing. We can't treat, a comment of somebody who thought there was an interest from somebody else, and when they acted on it, learned that, no, this person is not interested in you. These kinds of failed flirtations happen all the time. And we can't criminalize the biology. That men and women have an attraction, and we have to deal with that. None of what I'm saying excuses criminal behavior, but we need to have some sort of a standard so that we don't simply lynch people based on unproven accusations.
Right. I'm in total agreement with you today, Peter.
Oh, I love that, Susan.
I'm still not in agreement. Oh, I don't know. I don't know where you are with this Russian thing, but, I think they still have to be gone after for whatever mafioso-type dealings are going on with the Russians.
Well, Susan, let me before you go, let me clarify that.
Yeah.
Because my whole issue about Russiagate is that the claims that come from the intelligence community are unproven and appear to be false. And that does not in any way diminish that Trump is a corrupt guy who has surrounded himself with other corrupt people, and many of them have corrupt dealings with Russians, with Russian banks, Russian investors, Russian money launderers. And that's where we've seen this whole arc of the scandal morph into what is a fairly garden variety corruption scandal, as opposed to this, international intrigue that Russia hacked the DNC and that's what caused Hillary to lose the election. And
I never went for that. I just think that's untrue. But it's really, I think it's really important that the criminal aspect of Trump's, buddies. Lost you again.
No, you didn't. I guess you have a wayward Bluetooth there, Susan, so try to get...
How could that be? How could my car be 200 feet away and steal my car?
Well, you know what, Susan? I recently got a new car that has Bluetooth, and apparently my car and my phone are now conspiring because they think I'm an idiot. My phone tells me, hey, Peter, your car is parked right outside.
and my now I got an iPad from my kids for Christmas early, and now my iPad and my computer and my phone are all mixed up, and I can no longer work my nail on my computer at all. It doesn't accept. Yeah, it's really amazing. But my phone and my iPad like my nail.
All right. Well, Susan, I hope you get the technical support you clearly need. And
I do.
Don't forget to send me your utility bill, okay?
No, I qualified for that program that that one care, and this one is next. So I'm going to have a very tiny bill. All right.
Okay, Susan, thanks for the call. And that reference there is Susan recently moved into a new place, and she's on a limited income, and she often shares her light with other people. So I offered to pay her first month's electric bill to shed a little light on her new home. Thanks for that call, Susan, and I welcome anybody else who agrees or disagrees about the resignation of Al Franken. Or you can comment on other issues in the news. Got another caller here. Who's this?
Hey, Peter, it's Ian Berman. How are you?
Hi, Ian. Good to hear from you. I'm doing fine today, thanks.
Good to hear. Good to hear. I wanted to follow up on the discussion you just had with Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Had an interesting series of debates with people who were actually mainstream Democrats, one of which you started the whole discussion by saying, why aren't the Democrats using trying to shut down the government in light of the tax bill? And I went forward and put the premise that, well, because they're not really as against the tax bill as you think they were.
You're right about that.
I was agreeing that it's a worthwhile tactic to use, but I was saying how, well, you're just not really reading what their true intentions are. They give lip service to one thing, but they're not actually doing anything to try and stop this. Now, you do a far better job of following the mainstream media than I do, and I'm curious as to what your impression is as to what the Democrats are really doing about, bringing out not only Democrats, but, the 90% of Republicans who should be just as angered by this tax bill.
Well, first of all, let me jump down in my stack here to a story that I wanted to cite about the economy. The latest numbers show. Oh, where is that here? Good, robust job growth in the month of November. 228 new jobs were added, and the unemployment rate is down to 4.1%. Now, I recognize that there are many people who aren't working who don't show up in the unemployment figures, okay? I'm not fooled by that. But this is more evidence that we don't need a fucking tax cut. And the Democrats have never attempted to make the case that this entire effort is unnecessary. It is not, called for in any economic way. We don't need the stimulus. The economy is cooking along fairly well, and Obama paid the price for that. There was, very slow, stagnant growth after he, led the recovery. And he failed to blame the Republicans properly and assign them the responsibility for wrecking the economy. So I consistently hear Limbaugh and Hannity say, for 8 years, nothing happened with the economy because of Obama. And they don't go back 8 years and a month to look at what he inherited and what it took to try to fix that. But that said, the Democrats have become, and this is bizarre, more responsible stewards of the budget. There are many big exceptions to that, like the Pentagon. But overall, while Obama was president, the Democrats were not able to pass much legislation that added to the annual deficit or the long-term debt. The Republicans were the cops who prevented that. And now the roles are reversed, but the Democrats aren't doing a very good job of shaming the Republicans on borrowing $1.5 trillion to cut taxes. And then, of course, they're going to say that the government is broke, and so we have to cut all domestic spending, and then we have to go raid Medicare and Social Security. And I think the Democrats will not have strong footing to oppose those next moves against entitlements because they haven't made the case that not only are these tax cuts unnecessary, but they are really just a feeding frenzy for the cronies of the president. And I'll make one more point, Ian. That is, all of the marketing for this ugly tax package is that it's going to create new jobs. Well, General Electric announced yesterday that they're cutting 12,000 jobs, and Siemens is cutting 6,000 more, a total of 18,000. And this is just the latest evidence that corporate America is going to pocket these tax cuts, buy back stock to prop up their values and their stock option bonuses, and they're going to pay some dividends. But they're not going to invest in new facilities. They're not going to create jobs in any measurable way. And the Democrats are not making that case. Pelosi just yesterday was complaining that, the Republicans jacked up the Pentagon budget, so we want to increase domestic spending by the same amount. Well, we should be arguing that there is no basis to increase defense spending, and we should take those dollars and redeploy them to domestic needs.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be an easy case to make that the whole tax overhaul is inequitable in every sense of the matter, that it's only going to the elite investor class. And that's what disturbing me, is that they're not standing up and saying that, saying, hey, tax cuts are great, but when it's going to go to the 0.1% for the most part, it's not really going to help the country. And if you want to talk about economics, you can talk about how if you give a tax break to the bottom, 50%, they have a tendency to spend it, which helps the economy. Mm-hmm. But what I'm talking about here is that I don't see them standing up. Like it would seem like a natural rally cry that would help them in their next election and say, well, here you go, folks. This is your Republican Party giving away tax cuts to people who absolutely don't need it. We already have a tax system which is favored to the investor class, with their tax rates being lower than anybody making less than $75,000 a year. Now you want to give them a lot more tax breaks? This makes no sense. You should be calling up your Republican representative and senator today. Now, I can't understand why they're not making that simple case to the public. Mm-hmm. And what's really aggravating me is instead they're jumping on Al Franken. Just to tie the two together.
Right.
What it tells me is that they want the tax cuts because they're working for the same people as the Republicans are. They just won't admit it.
Well, Ian, hang with me here for a minute because I'd like to deliver my next story. It relates to whether or not the Democratic Party can be saved, and then I'd like you to comment further.
Sure.
Because right now there is a session underway, and I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly where in the country they are meeting, but there are 21 members on a Democratic National Committee commission called the Unity Reform Commission. And I've seen some videos posted on Facebook from Karen Bernal and Norman Solomon. They are co-authors of an autopsy report on the Democratic Party's failures in 2016. And they are pushing for important changes to the structure of the Democratic Party, including a sharp reduction in the number of superdelegates. And Ian, you know that I blame the superdelegates more than almost anybody else for foisting Hillary Clinton on the Democratic Party last year and, being unwilling to recognize the surge of Bernie Sanders compared to the stall of Hillary Clinton. But at this meeting, in addition to reducing superdelegates by 60%, the discussion is to require absentee voting and mandatory vote counts in states that hold caucuses for the primaries, encourage states to allow same-day party and voter registration, and set new guidelines at the DNC to prevent the kind of bias and rigging that Bernie Sanders endured last year. Now, what's fascinating is that this Unity Commission almost ejected Norman Solomon from the room because he was holding up a sign that said democracy or undemocracy, something like that. And they had a security guard who was ready to bounce him. And fortunately, he was able to plead his case, and they did not eject him. But it is symbolic of the tone-deaf nature of the leadership of the DNC, even as they consider reforms to try to save what I consider to be a fatally damaged political brand. What's your comment, Ian?
I entirely agree, but I think it's more insidious below the skin. What I'm seeing is that they are working under the Bill Clinton premise of we have to get the money.
Mm-hmm.
And they've become addicted to this flow of money. And they've disregarded the needs of most of their base, who still, for some reason, believe in them. That's why I started the whole conversation with the Facebook chat I had. And they just want to do the workings of their paymasters in the name of working for the people. But the working for the people is just a marketing brand. I don't see them do it anymore. And then when you take a look at how they just purged all the progressives out of the DNC,
mm-hmm.
and yet at the same time they're saying, well, the fault of the election was the Bernie Bros.
Yeah,
well,
right.
You've done nothing to earn the support of the Bernie Bros. And if anything, you should be looking at Sanders and saying, look, here's a guy who didn't get any money from the big-ticket donors, or maybe not any, but
not
probably
much.
Nothing significant.
Right.
And he was able to do what you haven't been able to do in your Clinton strategy since '92. So why not move forward? And it just, to me, it's very frustrating that most mainstream Democrats aren't seeing this. Now, the one thing you mentioned about the super delegates, I wanted to bring this up.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked Al Franken until he became the poster child of the super delegate vote. When he got on, I think it was CNN, and he said, well, despite the fact that 22%, he didn't say this exactly, but despite the fact that Minnesotans were supporting Bernie Sanders, I think they elected me to use my better judgment to cast my vote as the way I see it. And what he neglected to mention is that that superdelegate vote was locked up even before the primary started.
Right.
So he gave it away before he even knew who was going to be in the contest.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been opposed to him ever since that, because that's basically no democracy right there. That means we've become a pure plutocracy. But like you, I also feel like these allegations, most of which have come from unnamed sources that he can't really address.
Only half.
And there was one for example, the woman, I forget her first name, her last name was Menz, She came out and said that he had groped her during the picture. Well, her husband was taking the picture. He didn't notice anything.
Right.
She didn't tell him till way afterwards, and then he was like so nonplussed that he didn't go after Franken to ask him what happened.
Right. And also the picture doesn't indicate that any kind of a grab occurred before the shot was snapped.
Right.
Right.
I mean, he's a comedian. Now, it was a sophomoric picture, and it's in bad taste, but he is a comedian. He's trying to say, look at me, I'm with this hottie, and I'm doing this. There's so much more, and then when you take a look at Moore has a good chance of winning down in Alabama, and you have a man accused of rape in the White House, and the Democrats turn on this man instead of turning on the tax bill. It just tells me we don't have a party representing the people anymore.
And Ian, I don't think it was you, but tell me if I'm wrong. There was a little infographic I saw on Facebook today, and it said, the 32 or 33 senators who told Franken he had to resign should call a press conference and all demand that Trump resign. And I think that's a fair argument to make. If we're going to hold a Democrat to a very high standard, and I'm not saying that he is, without any culpability here, but again, we have to put this on some sort of a rational scale. He didn't rape anybody. The worst he did was assault by tongue and hand. And again, we have to really respect the law. And I read a letter or an email that I'd gotten from a female listener, Deborah Kennedy, who was calling me a creep because she perceived me as protecting creeps. And I'm simply calling for a fair process, and we've got to respect the rights of the accused in all cases. Because even people who are not being subject to criminal proceedings, to lose your job and to essentially be smeared for life when you have no way of confronting your accuser and really having some fair evaluation of whether this claim is true. And, I've spent a lot of time reviewing the cases of men who are incarcerated at San Quentin, which is just a half mile from me, and in other prisons around California. And many of them who I believe are, wrongfully convicted started off with an accusation that was based on a false claim of sexual abuse or sexual assault. And so I'm not saying that I doubt every woman who's come forward and courageously shared a painful story. But we can't just automatically believe that all of this is true. And the Garrison Keillor case is another one. I mean, if what he's saying is the total extent of what happened, it's just bizarre that he has essentially, been disappeared by Minnesota Public Radio. I can't counsel this. And one more point, Deborah Kennedy had criticized me saying that due process only applies in a criminal case. Well, Garrison Keillor is a member of the same union I belong to, SAG-AFTRA, and our contracts have specific language for wrongful termination. And it applies even in a case where the employer asserts just cause. And while, Matt Lauer and Garrison Keillor and these other broadcasters, Bill O'Reilly, they're all members of my union, they haven't exercised any effort to defend those rights. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. And so I'm just very concerned that this is a runaway train and that we've got a lot of sanctimonious people who are saying, it's okay, we're running over the right people.
Right. That's a presumption of guilt before innocence based upon numbers of allegations.
Yeah.
To me, with Franken, there's a couple of things which are really disturbing. Number one, I don't see a lot of courage in women coming out anonymously. Mm-hmm. There's not 30 women coming out, 15 using their names and 15 not. Mm-hmm. That'd be a lot more disturbing. But a number of these women, and the one that drove the senators to line up against Franken did come out anonymously.
Right.
So there's no opportunity to challenge that.
Yeah.
But
Ian, I'm going to wrap up here and jump to another call, but thanks for checking in today. Good to talk to you.
No problem.
All right. Who's this on line 2?
Hi, Peter. It's Kyle in Topanga.
Hey, Kyle. Welcome. How's
you doing?
How's your smoky air today?
Not so bad. They stopped the Skirball fire, which, if it had hopped the freeway, would burn Topanga to the ground. But
right.
Fortunately, the big money stepped in because of all the rich houses over on that end. So
yeah.
So they had a lot of good fire engines over there.
I was there just 2 weeks ago. We drove up to the Getty Center, so when I saw that video of the Skirball fire, wow, that was just devastating.
Yeah, that was a really dramatic photo that they took advantage of the angle of the hill.
I agree.
To make it look like all of L.A. is on fire. And this is typical, unfortunately, of the news media to use that kind of a photo opportunity to make it look like everything's ablaze. I mean, it's just amazing. I've gotten some almost frantic calls from friends who think that Southern California is burnt to a crisp,
right.
But it's not. So,
well, the silver lining here is that while the firefighters are working and while there's smoke in the air, the TV stations won't be able to do chopper car chases for a while.
Exactly. But I will say this. I was surprised at some of the stations doing coverage with no commercials.
Oh.
That built up a smidgen of goodwill in my heart towards them because they actually turned down the advertising revenue for 6-8 hours at one point straight.
Yeah, that happened up here too. It was good to see the TV stations really take the responsibility to serve the community. And up here, they all put out a lot of resources, reporters and trucks and wall-to-wall coverage without commercials. So they can do a good job when they want to.
Yeah, and it should be noted that that what you guys went through up there with the numbers, it's that's 20 or 50 times as many people displaced. And
well, no, wait a minute. We only had about 80,000 people who had to evacuate. You're at 200,000. We lost 6,000 homes and an additional 2,000 structures, commercial buildings and sheds and that sort of thing. So, there are variables here. I agree with you that so far the wine country fires were substantially worse than the damage in Ventura and the other 3 major fires that you're fighting right now.
In terms of deaths and numbers of houses destroyed,
yes.
It's easily 50 times as high.
And Kyle, did you catch that the Republican tax bill disallows losses from disasters from fires in California while it allows for the same losses to be written off in Republican states that had hurricanes, namely Texas and Florida? Isn't that beautiful?
The heartless.
Yeah.
Well, let's just go quickly to Al Franken. And, you're absolutely right. There should have been due process. There should have been hearings. The Republicans are jumping up and down because they finally got their revenge for Norm Coleman, the previous seat holder who Franken displaced by some ridiculously small number of votes, 250.
312.
Okay, there you go. So that led me to look up the history of the seat, which I thought was, worthy of some attention. An article in the Washington Post, which I normally despise but have to keep monitoring, in yesterday's edition that said that discusses it, and just to go into it so your listeners who are interested can look it up, the odd history of the seat that Al Franken is giving up. Well, it turns out that seat was held by Paul Wellstone.
Yeah.
And again, for those who may not be aware, Paul Wellstone, until his odd death by plane crash in 2002, wasn't it?
That's about right.
Was probably the leading progressive in the Senate.
Right.
If he wasn't, he's in the top 2 or 3. And I must say that the loss of Wellstone really hit me hard, which led to me Googling around a little more and then brought me to an article in The Atlantic Paul Wellstone's Legacy 10 Years Later. And it was written in 2012 by Al Franken. And here we have, I mean, I looked at this, and I'm looking at it right now, I feel chilled. He points out that Wellstone was the only senator up for re-election in 2002 to vote against the Iraq War.
That's right.
A vote he told people he was convinced would cost him his job. Mm-hmm. He was wrong because the polls showed him winning at the time of his death. Now, I find it amazing that 5 years ago Franken was willing to write that, because he turned out to be one of the biggest war military, gung-ho supporters. He never spoke up for reducing the military budget. Mm-hmm. He's always been in favor of whatever they wanted.
Yeah. Kyle, just hold for a quick second here. Caller on line 1, I'll be with you in a moment, okay? All right, Kyle, go ahead. I got you. Kyle? Oh, I guess I froze Kyle. Anyway, we'll move to line 1 now. Sorry about that, Kyle. Who's here on line 1? This is Peter B.
It's Carl in Columbus. Hello.
Hello, Carl. Good to hear from you.
I just want to mention one thing about Franken and then move on, because I think the discussion so far has been excellent, and I'm nursing a cold and I don't want to talk that much.
I can hear it, yeah.
But I did want to mention that from what I can see, the coverage of Franken compared to that of Republican resignations, which are still coming one after another, and which tend to be based on far more documented evidence, not just anonymous accusations by, A, B, and C. And yes, we understand that, the system in Congress is designed to protect elected officials,
mm-hmm.
To an extreme extent, which is something that Kirsten Gillibrand has been going to go after. It does appear to me that the coverage is extremely lopsided against Franken, and that we're not seeing the same amount of coverage by a long shot of some of these extreme and very perverse situations that we're seeing in the GOP that are leading to those resignations. But as I said, I think the Franken issue has been discussed very excellently this evening. So I just want to move on. And in fact, I'll let you answer it off air, which is there's something on your website about Marin County Television.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. And in fact, I'll let you just go at it, because this is, I'm nursing a cold. Not much we're talking right now.
Okay.
But
well, Carl, Marin TV is our local cable access, and I volunteer there. I was co-hosting a show for about 5 years, and we ended that this past year, and I've been doing a series of interview specials on the channel. So that's what that's related to, and I do have a couple of interviews that I'll probably be releasing as podcasts next week that come from recent TV interviews I've done here in Marin County. So that's...
Oh, nice stuff, plus a very nice natty suit that you're wearing in that photo there.
I do have suits, I just don't wear them for radio.
There you go.
Carl,
all right, so
Carl,
I am in fact going to let you go, but you have a great evening, and if I don't speak to you, a great holiday.
Thank you, and Carl, put a little scotch on that cold, will you?
Yeah, hello.
That'll work. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good to hear from you. All right, I appreciate your calls today. That's why I do the Facebook Live on Friday, because it gives me an opportunity to interact with you, and I really appreciate it. We got a lot of smart listeners and viewers on the Facebook feed, and I really do appreciate it. Let me wrap up with a couple of quick stories still in my stack here. Because of the war games that Trump has extended with South Korea, the North, Pyongyang, is responding with some pretty incendiary comments. North Korea says a nuclear war has become a matter of when, not if. They cite Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, and a possible replacement for Rexon Tillerson as Secretary of State, who made a series of what Pyongyang calls bellicose remarks. Pompeo said that Kim Jong-un doesn't have a good idea about how tenuous his situation is domestically and internationally, But the war games with B-1B supersonic bombers flying over the 38th parallel, these are a provocation. Trump sees them as a demonstration of strength. But that's because he's an idiot. And get this, the demonized Putin, who, by the way, has announced he is officially running for re-election in the spring, he has brokered potential talks with North Korea. His foreign secretary, Sergei Lavrov, said on Thursday, meeting with Rex Tillerson in Vienna, that Pyongyang is open to talks and that the Kremlin is willing to mediate. But the U.S., of course, imposes preconditions on any talks with Kim or his representatives, which mean that we are asking for a conflict of some sort and not willing to sit down and talk about it. Trump doesn't believe in diplomacy. Just look at the way he's cut the budget and run out a lot of the old guard at the State Department. They have done a study about the true impact of Hurricane Maria on the island of Puerto Rico. And while the official death toll is only 62, a careful analysis shows that over 1,000 people died unnecessarily and in excess of the average death rate in the weeks after Hurricane Maria. And it is really just obscene that we have bungled the response to rebuilding Puerto Rico and that the vulture capitalists will get preference over the needs of the people of the Commonwealth, a U.S. possession. Congratulations, Down Under. Aussies have done it. Yesterday, they finished the process of legalizing same-sex marriage. Nice going, Down Under. And finally today, abalone is a delectable, what is it? It's a shellfish that occurs along the Pacific coast here in California. I've had it maybe 10 times in the 40 years that I've lived in California. It is delicious, it is unique, and there will be no abalone in 2018. Due to severe decline of the population, the officials at the Fish and Wildlife Department have declared no abalone hunting, or actually what they do, divers have to free dive in water that is 40 to 60 feet deep to collect the abalone. They're not allowed to use tanks or other oxygen assistance, which makes it a true sport. But that sport will not be happening in California in 2018. Thanks for joining me live on Facebook. Great to see you, or I guess you see me. And thanks for listening to this podcast. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.